Well, hello, hello. Good afternoon. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. Thank you all for joining us today for the first of Susan G. Komen's Educate and Empower Launch and Learn events. It is October, which means it is a National Breast Cancer Awareness Month. We hope the speakers we have for you today will not only raise your awareness of the choices you have in your breast healthcare, but will also empower you to take action and prioritize your health. My name is Lorena Placencia, and I am happy and honored to serve as your MC today for Komen's Educate and Empower program. In my role as Telemundo Austin News anchor, I am always grateful to be part of and show support to organizations like Komen and Texas Oncology, who are bringing that community resources and education that help them improve their quality of life. And in this case, even when it involves a breast cancer diagnosis. I'll be remiss not to mention that we are in the middle of Hispanic Heritage Month. I know Komen is hard at work to reduce disparities for all communities. And for Hispanic and Latina women like myself, we appreciate the bilingual support Komen provides through their breast cancer helpline and educational materials. Today's program and those coming this month will serve to empower all of us. Komen, in partnership with Texas Oncology, is offering additional launch and learn events in this series. So please be sure to check this out and the upcoming Advocacy Metastatic Breast Cancer Series and Breast Health Forum also happening during Breast Cancer Action Month. As you look over this information in the screen, we have a few housekeeping items. Because this is a virtual program, we are reaching viewers across Central Texas, and especially with so many working at home. So we welcome you from wherever you are and encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A section throughout the presentation, and I will present them right after. So let's get started. Our topic today is the difference nutrition makes. People who have had cancer often want to know what they can do to stay healthy, both during and after treatment. We know that nutrition is an important part of health optimization, but there is so much conflicting information. Dr. Jerry Fain, MD, and Katharine Lord, PAC, will address issues and questions pertaining to nutrition. They will discuss why nutrition matters, the science behind it, resources for nutrition education, and tips and tricks for healthier eating. It's very important indeed. Dr. Fain is a triple board certified medical oncologist at Texas Oncology Austin Midtown. After completing a 3-year fellowship in hematology and medical oncology at UT Southwestern Medical School, Dr. Fain and his family moved to Austin in 1996. As a physician, he has strived to care for patients as he will care for his family, a practice inspired by his father's own practice style. He's a strong believer that any treatment of disease should encompass a better understanding of the importance of aerobic exercise, diet, and stress management, especially during these difficult times. Katharine F. Lord, PAC, is a physician assistant at Texas Oncology in Austin, Texas. She earned a Master of Medical Science in physician assistant from Emory University School of Medicine. Katharine has practiced hematology and medical oncology since graduating PA school in 2008 and has published numerous articles and presented original research at the ASCO conference. In February 2020, she completed the City of Hope intensive course in cancer risk assessment. In addition, Katharine has served as the advanced practice provider lead for the Austin region for the past 5 years. In this role, she assists with onboarding and mentoring advanced practice providers, delivering vital education and policy updates, and connecting clinicians and patients to myriad of community resources. She takes a whole person approach to medical care and has special interest in genetics and nutrition. Katharine is married and has 2 sons and enjoys writing and traveling. Let's welcome Dr. Fain and Ms. Lord.
Hi, thank you so much. Nutrition is a topic that Dr. Fain and I are both very passionate about, so we're thrilled to be here today and talking to you all, and thank you so much for joining us. That was a wonderful introduction as well, Lorena, so thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Fain and I want you to know that we very much believe that nutrition matters. It matters for a variety of reasons and in a variety of settings. It matters in the setting of a cancer diagnosis. For example, we know that women who have had breast cancer in the postmenopausal setting, maintaining a lean body mass can help reduce the risk of breast cancer recurrence. We know that people who are healthier and have fewer underlying medical conditions are often able to tolerate treatment better and to continue on with treatment. So an example of that would be someone with an underlying cardiac condition. We may be limited in what drugs we can use to treat their cancers, and they may be less able to tolerate some of the side effects of our treatments if they have underlying medical conditions. We know that nutrition matters in optimizing health and in feeling our best. And we know nutrition matters in terms of reducing the risk of diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure. And so in that sense, this talk really is for everyone. Yes, it matters in the setting of a cancer diagnosis, but it also matters for everyone. And so I hope that everybody watching will find this talk to be applicable. Actually, if you could just go back one slide, thanks. So when and why does nutrition come up when we're talking to our patients? So it comes up in a variety of settings. It comes up in the survivorship setting. So patients who have finished their treatment and we start to talk about, okay, how do we optimize your health going forward? That's a time when we start to talk about nutrition in some instances, if we haven't started that discussion already. Also, I think that nutrition is an opportunity for patients to feel empowered. When someone is diagnosed with cancer, there's often a sense of a loss of control. And I think what and how we eat can be a way for patients to feel like they're regaining some of that control. We know that nutrition matters in preventing cancer. We know that there is data out there that's undeniable that obesity is linked to cancers such as breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer. And so that when we reduce our risk of obesity, we are reducing our risk for cancer. We also know that food and nutrition can help our medicines and therapies work better, actually. We're using immunotherapies for a variety of cancers nowadays, and we know that patients who have a healthy gut biome do better on immunotherapies than those who do not. And we know that a healthy gut biome is achieved through good nutrition. We also talk to our patients about nutrition when we talk about some of the other conditions or diseases they might have, like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. We try to improve those conditions, and we do that through nutrition. Next slide, please. So some things to just remember as we're talking is that while we think nutrition is super important, we also recognize that pharmaceutical interventions, radiation therapy, surgery, all these modalities we have at our disposal are also very important in treating cancer. And so that's just something to always keep in mind. And whenever I talk to my patients about nutrition, I always say, hey, I don't just talk the talk, I walk the walk. And Dr. Fain does too. He and I have both made changes in the way that we eat over the course of our practice. And so we have a sense of what patients are going through and the questions they have, and we have real life feedback that we can provide. I always think that's helpful. And I always tell people that when you're starting to think about nutrition, the first step is to learn and to educate yourself. I think that if you understand why it's important, you're more likely to make changes, and they're more likely to be changes that are sustainable and changes that will last you a lifetime, and that's really the goal. Next slide, please. So what is the best diet to recommend? Well, it's not a one size fits all. Not every patient is going to be able to tolerate every treatment. We recognize that patients come to us with underlying conditions such as irritable bowel syndrome, for example, or other medical conditions that's going to make eating certain foods more difficult than for some others. We also tell our patients that when you're weighing yourself, you need to weigh yourself at the same time of day with the same amount of clothing on. And that if there is weight gain once you've made some dietary changes, that's something that needs to be looked at and addressed. We look at the efficacy of the diet. We look at lack of adherence. But I also want to make the point that sometimes I tell my patients, let's not focus on the weight loss initially. Eating right and exercising is about being your healthiest and about feeling your best. And often when someone starts making changes, the weight loss will come. And so sometimes I don't put the emphasis on weight loss, although sometimes that's important. It's not always the initial thing that we want to look at or think about. And I think I've alluded to this, but when we talk about dietary modifications and nutrition, it's not something that we want to be a fad or a diet. These are lifestyle modifications. Next slide, please. So the way that I like to present nutrition to patients and the way I like to think about it is like nutrition on a spectrum. So on one end of the spectrum, you sort of have your average American diet. It's a diet that is often consists of fast foods and processed foods and packaged foods, sodas, high caloric drinks, a diet heavy in red meat or processed meat. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have sort of the ideal or healthiest diet. And that's a diet that's going to consist of vegetables and fruits, and whole grains. We're going to be talking about reducing or eliminating unhealthy foods, cutting back on red meats. We're going to talk about portion control, and we're going to talk about exercise. And so the idea is that if you're thinking about it like a spectrum, you're heading in the direction of healthier eating. It doesn't need to be something that occurs overnight or even quickly, but making small changes in the beginning is often a great first step. And so I think that's some context to keep in mind as we go forward. So I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Fain, and he's going to get into some really great data and sort of nitty gritty of why nutrition matters.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction as well. I'm privileged to give this talk to you because it's something that's become very important to me, and I hate to say that I was initially practicing this when I started my practice 26 years ago, but 6 years ago now, I had a heart attack, and I began to wonder, what did I do wrong? And I was amazed to find out that the best diet for heart disease is exactly the same diet as is for cancer prevention. And so I began to research this, and it became interesting to me that we're not taught this in medical school, and we're not taught this even after we get out of medical school. And so on this slide, which is rather busy, I want you to focus in on one part of it. Only 1/4 of the medical schools in the United States right now have even one course about nutrition. 6 of 7 graduating physicians feel they are inadequately trained to counsel patients about their diet. My daughter is a third-year medical student right now, and she's had no education on nutrition. But to their credit, they do have a nutrition club. So they're trying to let students learn about it, but a lot of it is anecdotal. If you look at the American population, you have 70% of Americans taking at least one prescription. And despite the fact that we have advanced healthcare and access to medicines, we still have a long ways to go in getting the United States population to live like some of the other countries. We're 27 out of the top 34 democracies as far as life expectancy. Next slide. So what's the information that's given? And the American Heart Association has some simple recommendations, which are fairly generic and obvious. Tobacco, you should avoid tobacco use. We want to try to keep your body mass index ideal, which is below 25. It depends on your body, your height and weight. They recommend that you're active, that you eat healthier with increased access to fruits and vegetables, that you have a good cholesterol, blood pressure, and blood sugar. Next slide. And what they found is that if you don't smoke, you're not overweight, and you do get 30 minutes of exercise a day, and you have a healthier diet, then patients were less likely to have chronic disease. And you could decrease your risk of developing diabetes by 90% if you had all 4 of those metrics met. You could decrease your risk of a heart attack by 80% and decrease your risk of stroke by 50%. It decreases cancer risk by 33%, and the risk of colon cancer appears to be more affected than some of the other cancers, and the risk can decrease by 71%. Next slide. So when I started looking at this, Katharine and I both became interested, and we focused on several different books. And it's interesting as you read about this that there's been data out there since 2009, even dating back 10 or 15 years, looking at the way that diet can make you healthier. We do know that there are a lot of people who live to their 100s, and there was a book that was published called The Longevity Diet. And I'll bring that book up and it'll be referenced in the end slides that Katharine will go over as well. But it's a great reference. And in that book, they talk about Dean Ornish and Elizabeth Blackburn, who were awarded the Nobel Prize in 2009 because of their research on something called telomerase, which is an enzyme in cells that makes telomeres grow. And the reason that we're interested in that is that there is a relationship between telomere length and longer survival. And if patients were put on a whole food plant-based diet, which means they eliminated meats, they, for the most part, eliminated the grain, not grains, but milk and cheese products, dairy products. They found that telomerase activity was increased, which led to a lengthening of telomere length. Interestingly, just weight loss alone and vigorous exercise did not have the same impact. So it was the quality, not the quantity of the amount of food that was the sole factor to improve telomere length, and telomere length has been associated with longer survival. Next slide. And so then they went on to look at what happens if you have been a vegetarian and then you lapse and go back to eating meat. And people that once had a vegetarian diet had 146% increase in the odds of having heart disease and 152% increase in the incidence of stroke, 166% increase in diabetes, and 23% increase in the odds of weight gain once they changed their diet. During the 12 years after transitioning from non-meat eating to meat eating, there was a 3.6-year decrease in life expectancy. So what does the American diet consist of right now? 32% of our calories come from animal-based foods, 57% from processed plant foods, and only 11% comes from your natural grains, beans, fruits, vegetables, and nuts. Next slide. Caldwell Esselstyn published a book years ago that was and he was a practicing cardiothoracic surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic. And he published a case of 200 people with significant heart disease that were placed on a plant-based diet after they had failed everything. And what they found was that they could prevent further episodes of heart disease, heart attacks, in 99.4% of patients who followed it. The 0.6% accounts for the one person who did not stay on the diet, lapsed, and then subsequently had a cardiac event. Now, understand that statin drugs and all of the medicines that we have right now for heart disease cannot reverse atherosclerosis or hardening of the arteries. And Dr. Esselstyn, in his study, published pictures of patients' cardiac catheterizations where they inject a dye and they look at the blood vessels, and the blood vessels were completely occluded. These were patients who really had no option, but were placed on this study. And amazingly, this plant-based diet did more for them than any medication could. All of these patients, with the exception of only a few, were really on hospice and thought to be end stage. So just to give you an idea of the impact, only 3% of patients have a risk reduction with a cholesterol lowering drug. The problem is that as physicians, we're not given the education, nor do we have the time with patients to try to explain that there are some things they can do that have a much bigger impact than a pill. Next slide. So Michael Greger also published a book, and he is a Harvard-trained internist, and the book is called How Not to Die. And one of the biggest challenges that you have if you are to transition to a diet that's free of meat is trying to get enough protein. And there is a misconception in society that you need meat and have to get meat, and that's the only source in which you can get protein. And if you look at this list that's in front of you, which I know is rather cumbersome, it will give you an idea of the amount of servings that you would need if you're trying to get some type of protein into your diet. And you can see that broccoli, cabbage, collards, kale, berries, beans, flax seeds, nuts will give you some protein. And so it was interesting for me to learn that it was only B12 that we really need out of meat products. And if you're a completely vegan, which means you're really eliminating all meat, then you have to have a B12 supplement, and you can take that orally. It takes about 5 years to deplete yourself of B12, so it's not something that would happen overnight. But if you take a supplement, you can avoid that. But otherwise, as an adult, we really can get all of our protein needs through nutrition and through plant-based nutrition. Next slide. And in 2012, they did a survey, and about 52% of Americans felt it was easier to figure out their income tax than to figure out what they should eat. And part of that is because we really don't have the time or the education to talk to people about that. And you can go ahead and push the rest of the slide. And so what has been clear is when you look at eating habits of people in other nations, they have been associated with an improvement in overall survival and longevity. And in fact, there are several misconceptions that we have. Probably everybody has seen the commercial looking at milk with the milk mustache, which claims that if you drink milk that you can prevent osteoporosis. But in reality, milk is ingested and taken in as an acid and broken down. And in order to neutralize the acid, you release calcium from your bones to neutralize the acid effects of milk. So milk actually promotes osteoporosis. It does not prevent it. But if you look at other countries, when they used complex carbohydrates, vegetables, and even if they had one portion of meat a week, they still had a survival advantage. So what we're trying to come to grips with is what diet is best for you. Do you eliminate meat completely, or do you just limit it? And what I do what Katharine does, and it's hard to change habits until you start slow and you make some changes, because it's very difficult to make a diet work if you don't enjoy the diet. If you crave something, sometimes you have to give in, but we can look at our portions and we can try to make this something that's a meaningful change. Next slide. So in the longevity diet, which was published in 2016, Dr. Longo felt that there was a benefit to doing a fast mimicking diet, which is something different than what you read about in other books. And this book and the information were presented to us by an MD PhD who came to our office talking about phase 1 clinical trials, which are the new experimental treatments. We're always trying to improve upon the efficacy of therapy, and we're trying to minimize the toxicity. And much to everyone's surprise, they brought up this book, and Dr. Longo published this book in 2016, where while he was at UCLA doing his dissertation, and he was trying to figure out what made people live to 100. And so he started looking at diets of people in Italy, looking at people in Ecuador, and looking at people in Loma Linda, California, as well as the Far East, where there are pockets of people that live into the 100s, and they have the largest number of centurions in the world in these areas. And what he figured out was that if you deprive yourself of calories, not completely eliminating them, but depriving them in a fast mimicking diet by dropping to like 1,200 calories on day 1 and 800 calories on day 2, 3, 4, and 5, if you did that even once every 6 months, there are health benefits to that. And it allows you to repair and replace old cells. Senescent cells means they're old or they're abnormal, and generate larger numbers of stem cells. And with all the information that's coming out about stem cells and immunotherapy, I thought this was fascinating. And as you read Dr. Longo's book, they were doing a study in 2016 looking at the side effects of chemotherapy in those patients who have a fast mimicking diet. Now you cannot fast for 5 days if you're getting every 3-week chemotherapy, because the average amount of weight loss is about 4 pounds from 5 days of fasting. What we have been recommending to our patients now is a modification of this, and you fast the day before and the day of your treatment, but it's not a complete fast. And the book talks about using different supplements. I have patients count calories and try to have them be healthy calories. We're noticing that patients have a benefit in the amount of side effects that they have: less toxicity, less irritation to the mouth, less nausea and vomiting. And the premise behind that is that regenerating or senescent cells, or cells that are about to die, they cannot recover from fast mimicking. They cannot recover from caloric deprivation. And cancer cells have no controlled cell death. That's part of the definition of a cancer cell, is that it's just a cell that's forgotten how to die. And so we believe that doing a fast mimicking diet may make cancer cells more susceptible to chemotherapy, because they cannot go into a sleepy state, if you will. They cannot hibernate when you're fasting. And so they are more susceptible to the effects of chemotherapy, which affects the DNA. Next slide. I'm not going to go through this, but it was interesting that what they did was they actually found several different genes that appear to be related to longevity. And one of them is insulin growth factor 1, which we'll touch upon. Next slide. So one of the most abundant proteins in meat is actin. And if you consume high levels of animal, but not protein, there was a increase in diabetes and an increased mortality from heart disease. What they found was after you eat animal protein, you release insulin growth factor 1. And that has been associated with an increased incidence of breast cancer and other types of cancer. And this high protein intake can cause activation of growth hormone, which in turn increases insulin and insulin-like growth factor. And it's interesting because I was really surprised to figure out that insulin got involved with this at all, because insulin is really an inflammatory protein. And there's long been a theory that disease of all types, heart disease, thrombotic diseases like strokes, clotting disorders, cancer, are related to inflammation. And insulin is an inflammatory type protein. Next slide. So in the longevity diet, they found that the centurions eat fish, and they limited their fish to 2 to 3 portions a week. They tried to avoid fish that had high mercury content. And then they were noticing that patients that are sensitive to any kind of caloric restriction appear to be older patients. They do not metabolize their food as well. They may malabsorb, but for whatever reason, if they started to lose weight or strength or body mass, then they needed to reintroduce some things into their diet that would allow their weight to be stabilized. Next slide. And so what is the amount of protein that we need? About 0.3 to 0.36 grams of protein per pound of body weight per day. So about 30 grams should be consumed in a single meal if you can. And that's where it gets tricky. When patients go on this diet, they have to learn how to really not count calories, but they count protein. And once they start doing it, it becomes easier. And there are a lot of different options around town that are vegetarian that actually have a portion of nuts and grains and different types of plants and beans that can help you increase the amount of protein that you take in. So preferably, we're trying to avoid red meat, white meat, cheese. In this longevity study, they avoid fish. They eat fish predominantly, but if you look at the data that comes out from the How Not to Die study, they really recommend limiting fish. And so we really don't need that much if we can just learn to supplement protein in other ways. Next slide. And I think this goes without saying, we're trying to minimize bad fats and sugars. Diets are preferably low in saturated, hydrogenated, and trans fat. Complex carbohydrates are better. You know, in the longevity diet, because a lot of these patients came from Italy, they used a lot of oil and they used pasta and rice and bread. Some of the things in which, if you're wanting to try to minimize inflammation, you might want to moderate in your diet. But it's interesting that when you look at the longevity diet, there's some diversity here. And I don't think it's an exact science. As I learn more and more about nutrition, it does get conflicting and confusing. And so when you are on a diet, you have to look at how well the diet works for you and how you feel. Next slide. And they talk about taking a multivitamin. I tell all patients when they're on a diet that it's good for them to take a multivitamin. Usually minerals are included in your multivitamin, and an omega-3 fish oil is not bad to take as well. Next slide. I'm going to skip past this because this is really based on the longevity diet, and it talks about eating from your ancestry. Basically, what I tell patients is if you were brought up on certain foods and you know you tolerate those are going to be part of our normal diet. What we try to avoid are the fried foods, especially, you know, your fried meats and things like that, and any fried vegetable, because the frying process itself converts the oil into a superoxide, a radical. And so we believe it's not that you're frying it in oil, it's the temperature you're doing it at, and the oil mixes with oxygen, which causes these superoxides and radicals, which we think can be bad in the body. Next slide. Interestingly, what they did talk about was the way we eat. And one thing that was a takeaway is that breakfast is your most important meal. You've been fasting for a long period of time and your body needs that. You'll feel tired, you won't feel good. And oftentimes you'll find that you gain weight because you release stress. You release cortisol. When you get stressed, you release cortisol, which makes you want to eat. So what I tell patients, just like Katharine was mentioning, is don't look at your weight, look at your waist size. Are you losing weight in your waist? Are you losing it in your hips and thighs, or wherever you accumulate fat? Sometimes as you build muscle, you will gain weight as you lose fat, so your weight doesn't really change. There's no benefit to eating 5 to 6 times a day. It's difficult to consume enough portions of beans and vegetables that you would have obesity from that because of the small caloric intake. And elderly patients should be a subset in which you may have to eat more frequently. And what it does talk about is that eating heavy meals in the evening are more likely to be associated with sleep disorders and indigestion. And with 60% of patients complaining of sleep disorders, that's been something I've been looking at and talking to patients about. When is their last meal and how large is it? Next slide. Another thing they brought up in the longevity diet is to observe time-restricted eating, confining meals and snacks to within an 11 to 12-hour period. And that gives you a period of time to fast. And this is the hardest thing, but amazingly, if you do this, you will start to lose weight, even if you do nothing but to change the timing that you eat. And you should not eat within 3 to 4 hours of going to sleep. Next slide. And this just talks about the fast mimicking diet itself. The benefits, what they found was weight loss. They found in laboratory animals, tumors would shrink, skin inflammatory disorders were cut by 50%, stem cell regenerative process, including stem cells in the muscle and brain, were stimulated, better motor coordination, learning, and memory. Next slide. And this just talks about the benefits that they found when they did their study at the University of Southern California. There was weight loss, there was a decrease in blood sugar, there was a drop in blood pressure, a decrease in cholesterol, a drop in insulin growth factor 1, and the C-reactive protein, which is a marker of inflammation, dropped. And there was a 25 milligram per deciliter drop in triglycerides. And that is just with a single 5-day fast over a period of 3 months. So they fasted for 5 days, watched these patients and observed them. Next slide. And these are who shouldn't do the fast mimicking diet. If you're over the age of 70, frail, have liver, kidney disease, you want to talk to your doctor about it. If you are going to do a fast mimicking diet, patients who are on antihypertensives are especially sensitive to changes in their weight, and you might need adjustments in your medication. But that's the goal. And so when I have patients that I see, I try to get them off medicines if they can, because you're never going to feel better than when you're off of medicine. Next slide. So then in general, they talk about if you're in good health, you do this fast mimicking diet for every 6 months. If you're physically active and you can do it every 4 months. This is still a work in progress. And although this was published 4 years ago, this is still something that is fairly controversial. But I think it's something that if I were you, I would keep on your radar, because there may be a benefit to doing even a minor modification of this fast mimicking diet. Next slide. This is sort of redundant. It talks about how to get protein. This enumerates how many grams of protein that you get. And you can see that if you're going to try to get 30 grams of protein from cauliflower, you're going to have several cups of cauliflower. You can find that the lentils, the beans, edamame, a lot of these have green peas. They have a whole lot more. Navy beans, kidney beans, black beans, pinto beans, all of those have quite a bit more protein in them per cup. Next slide. And then everybody else asks about exercise. It's always beneficial to do that. It's interesting that studies are showing that if you sit for more than 6 hours a day, it increases mortality. Someone had said, and I think it's probably true, that sitting is going to be the next tobacco for our generation. And so getting up, even standing, having a desk that allows you to stand, walking, even doing some swimming, just 3 hours a day can burn. If you're standing 3 hours a day, you burn 50 calories an hour. That's 30,000 calories a year. That's like running 10 marathons. Next slide. And how much exercise do you need? We start out slow and then you work your way up. The general rule is, the more you can exercise each week, and really this just means walking at a rate that's close to 4 miles an hour. So if you're on a treadmill, you can judge what your speed is, but it's a brisk walk, walking fast enough that you catch your breath a little bit. You could talk, but you still catch your breath. But if you find that you can start out slow and work your way up, there's a huge health benefit to this. Next slide. And at this point, I'm going to turn the talk over to Katharine.
Sorry, I had a moment there where I couldn't unmute myself. So as we talk about making some of these nutrient changes and looking at the foods we're eating, I think it's important to look at nutrition labels. I always think to myself, and I tell my patients, you know, we are what we eat. And you want to know what you're putting in your body. So when you look at a nutrition label, look for a couple of different things. Do you know what those ingredients are? Can you pronounce the words? If you haven't heard of the words and you can't pronounce them, probably it's an indication that it shouldn't be going into your body. There's also a 5-to-1 rule. So if the ratio of grams of carbohydrates to the grams of dietary fiber is 5 or less, then the product is a healthier whole grain. And so that's just kind of a good general rule of thumb. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of resources that we can point you to continue to learn about healthy eating. And Dr. Fain and I have a comprehensive list which we will make available to you. And on this list, we always put several documentaries. You know, we all live really busy lives and have a lot going on. And so sometimes sitting down and watching a documentary is easier than sitting down and reading a book. I particularly like the movie Forks Over Knives, the documentary What the Health, and also Game Changers. And those are all available on Netflix. And they walk you through why a more plant-based whole grain approach is a healthier approach. And so I think these films can be informative. Next slide, please. So Dr. Fain referenced this book before, How Not to Die by Michael Greger. I've got it right here. And I like this book as a starting place for learning about healthy eating. This book, he breaks down kind of in two halves. The first half, he sort of breaks down where he talks about why it's important to eat a more plant-based whole grain diet. And he breaks it down into chapters based on sort of body systems. So there's actually a breast cancer chapter. There's a chapter on heart disease, lung disease, brain disease. And so I think that can be really specific to certain individuals and helpful in that way. The second half of the book, he talks about how, what are the foods you should be eating and why? What are the benefits of some beans over others, some berries over others? And so it's a very user-friendly book. Next slide, please. And actually, next slide, please. So I always think that when you're starting to think about eating differently, having recipes is helpful. You can feel a little overwhelmed at first about what do I eat? You know, okay, I'm supposed to eat more vegetables, more fruit, cut back on meat. Well, how do I do that? So I think recipes is a great place to start. There's a website that I've listed here called Oh She Glows. This is a woman who her recipes are plant-based. She has a website, she has cookbooks. I think that's a great place to start. There's an app that you can download on your phone. It costs a couple of dollars, and it's designed to help people transition into a more plant-based whole grain approach to eating. So I really, I like that app. It's filled with recipes. You know, just having vegetarian cookbooks on hand can be helpful, cookbooks that focus on healthy eating. I happen to have this cookbook at home, and I was looking at it the other day because I was making a lentil recipe. And I noticed that in the back of the cookbook, there's I'm going to hold it up here, but there's a program, meal programs that she kind of sets aside. One is how to eat vegan for a whole week. One is just healthy eating for a week. And in this healthy eating program, she talks about, okay, you know, we're not eating red meats during this work. There is some chicken, there is some fish, but lots of vegetables. And so there's tons of resources out there that can even give you a meal plan for a week if you want to try that out. And I think that's a good starting place. You know, more plant-based recipes can be found anywhere. This was one I pulled out of a Bon Appetit magazine the other day, and I made for dinner. It was a lentil and sweet potato based recipe. So, you know, eat the rainbow. Color is good. Shop the part of the grocery store that's on the periphery where you're looking at your fresh foods. If you're opening up packages to eat your food, you want to kind of say, do I really need this? Can I have something fresh or real food instead? Don't drink your calories. That's a little tip and trick I always tell people. It's important to drink a lot of water. You want to generally drink about half your body weight in ounces every day. And then when you are eating something healthy like a salad, think about what are you putting on top of that salad, right? Are you putting a dressing that's got some not healthy oils? Is it, Is it, instead think about doing an avocado oil or an extra virgin olive oil with some lemon. That's a healthier alternative for an unhealthy salad dressing. As Dr. Fain said, you want to avoid fried foods. You want to think about baking, grilling, or steaming your foods. And then I think planning and prepping is helpful, especially in the beginning when you're making changes. Make a big batch of a vegetable stew or and plan it out for your lunch for the next 3 days. If you don't plan, you're going to be more likely to just reach for and grab what is right there instead of what's healthy. So we will make these resources available to you, and I think we're going to take some time to answer some questions now.
Yes, that's right. Great information. Thank you, Dr. Fain and Katharine. What excellent information. We have received some questions, and if you're ready, we will present them now. First of all, yes, we will share the slides, and also someone is asking about diet with seafood.
That's a good question. I think that fish is probably a healthier alternative if you're going to get protein, than clearly better than red meat. I think what happens is over time, our goal would be to get patients on limited amounts, once a week, twice a week, and think of it as a delicacy, like you would your dessert. And as Katharine said, try to eat the rainbow, where if you're having a salad, that you might have, bell peppers of all colors, different colored tomatoes, because believe it or not, there's different nutritional enzymes and benefits to you based on the color of the vegetable. Frozen is just as good as fresh, but eating seafood, yes, I think is good, especially baked. It was really hard for me to get off of meat. And when I first started the diet, I lost about 15 pounds, and I wasn't really I didn't need to lose the weight, and it wasn't healthy. And so I learned the hard way of what happens when you have protein deprivation. And so, shrimp is actually something that a lot of people like, crabs. I mean, yeah, you can have those. What I would still say is limit what you have. Don't have, if you look at your plate, your meat portion should be less than 20%, 80% should be vegetables and grains and nuts and things like that, salads. But yes, you can still have those. I mean, anything that's baked is good for you. If you have hypertension, remember that there's quite a bit of sodium in shrimp. And in general, sodium really should be restricted in our diet. There are huge benefits to reduction of sodium. It reduces your likelihood of hypertension and fluid accumulation. It's really, it takes away to the flavor of foods. And once you start a plant-based diet, if you end up using lots of different types of rosemary and other types of things like that, you really bring out the flavor in food. But yes, I mean, in general, I think you can have seafood. I would just limit it.
Thank you. I think we're all getting hungry here.
Yeah.
We have another question from a breast cancer survivor. Says, if I can't do it all, what are the 3 things you recommend I do to prevent recurrence?
Well, I think the first thing I would do is, if you're not of an ideal body weight, get to that body weight. And remember, diet is a 4-letter word. What you want to do is you want to try to adjust your calories, and you want to try to eat healthier in a way that is sustainable. But if you're not overweight, if you are overweight, drop your weight. The second thing I would do is get on an exercise regimen. It has huge benefits to you psychologically and emotionally. And the third thing is make sure you're getting sleep. A lot of people really don't feel well because they're tired and they're not getting good sleep. There's a book, it's not part of this talk, but one of my patients told me in a support group in a talk just like this. It's called No More Sleepless Nights. I don't remember the author, but he is a PhD and he's director of the sleep lab at the Mayo Clinic. And I would encourage you to look at that book, because in the very format of the book, it talks about what problems are you having, and you take a survey and it will tell you what is your problem. And it's a non-pharmacologic way to try to avoid insomnia. But a lot of people that have cancer are stressed. They don't realize that they're getting too little sleep and they don't feel good. So maintaining ideal body weight, exercising, eating well, and getting good sleep, I think are paramount. I don't know, Katharine, do you have anything?
No, I think those are great. And I always tell people, water. I think drinking water, if you're hydrated, you feel better also. And also, if you're drinking water, you're less likely to be drinking juice and soda and some of the other things that are not as good for us.
That's right. That's great advice. Someone says, I've heard a lot about inflammatory foods, for instance, sugar. How do those impact cancer treatment and long-term survivorship?
Well, it's interesting, in the book, I don't remember if I think it was the How Not to Die book. They talk about that if you feed a patient an orange, and you look at their blood sugar afterwards, even though oranges or even some of the other fruits like that have a lot of sugar, there's not a spike in blood sugar as compared to if you take carbohydrates in another way. If you take sugars from Coke or from any beverages or fruit juices that are supplemented with that, it's not the physiologic way that you normally get that, and it's in such high doses that it does cause a spike in your blood sugar. And when you have a spike in blood sugar, you release insulin and insulin growth factor 1. So, in general, what you look at is most diets try to limit the carbohydrates that you take in. If you're going to have a fruit, the berry group has the lowest amount of carbohydrates. And if you think about it, if it's sticky to touch, that has a lot of sugar in it. So watermelon will have more, and cantaloupe will have more sugar than will the berry group. So blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, they're the lowest. Strawberries have just a touch more, but even those are smaller in amount. But look at your carbohydrate to limit it. If you do that 5-to-1 rule that Katharine was talking to you about, if you take in carbohydrate, if you take in fiber, that negates some of the negative effects. And that 5-to-1 rule is very beneficial. But in general, we try to avoid the sugars.
Thank you, Dr. Fain. Someone else says, can you share an example of a patient or two who has had success during and after treatment by implementing the longevity diet?
Sure.
I can think of a patient that comes to mind who is doing the fasting mimicking diet. So fasting the day before and the day of treatment. And this is somebody who's been on chemotherapy for quite a while. And by doing this diet, she has essentially reduced significantly the number of side effects that she was having from treatment. Nausea and fatigue have been significantly reduced by following that diet, where she's, calorie restricting on the day before and the day of. So we have seen it be effective in patients who are using that diet to help mitigate some of the side effects of chemotherapy.
I also have a lot of patients who have breast cancer are on aromatase inhibitors like Arimidex, Femara, or Letrozole, and about 30% of those women will have joint pain at some point, or even bone pain, to the point that they're almost scared that they have breast cancer in the bones. And I was amazed. I had a patient that I was following, and we had tried her on every medication, and she wanted to go back and try one that she couldn't tolerate. She had problems with it, but at the same time, she was trying to lose weight. And we started talking about nutrition. She saw Katharine, she talked to me, and she lost about 45 pounds. Much to my surprise, she went to her orthopedic surgeon because she needed to have a knee replacement. She no longer needed the knee replacement because her pain was gone. She still has arthritis. She still has degenerative joint disease, but she no longer needed surgery. She also eliminated her blood pressure medicines. And then she realized that one of her blood pressure medicines was keeping her up at night because she was coughing all the time. And then her side effects from the aromatase inhibitor went away. So after trying every medication, I never even thought to suggest changing her diet as a means of having her tolerate the medicine better. But she improved in several different ways. And it was really exciting. I told Katharine about it because we get excited when patients get off of medicine because we really don't want to prescribe all this. Obviously, the aromatase inhibitor is important, but for them to feel so much better, we don't think about it, but look at every medicine you're taking. And if you looked at the side effect profile, you would be highly motivated to try to do something that might allow you to get off that medicine. And that's an exciting part for us.
And actually, that particular patient, her husband also changed the way he ate, and he was able to get off of his blood pressure medication, his cholesterol medication, and he lost 30 pounds.
Wow, that's incredible. We got a couple more questions before we are done. Thoughts on buying only organic produce?
So that's always a question that we get an answer or that we get asked. And if you Google the Dirty Dozen, that's a quick answer to this question. If you just go on Google and Google Dirty Dozen, it gives you a list of a dozen vegetables and fruits that should be bought organic. Generally, things that come in a shell or that you peel off like a banana, those are ones that are going to be, not as important to be organic. I generally, as a general rule of thumb, think organic is better, but organic is sometimes more expensive and not as readily available. So Googling the Dirty Dozen is a good quick answer to that question.
That's great, thank you. And what are your thoughts about juicing?
You know, I think there's some benefits to juicing. Go ahead, Catherine. What were you?
Well, I was just going to say, Dr. Fain kind of mentioned earlier that when you separate the juice from the fruit, you're separating the sugar from the fiber, and your body processes that juice or sugar more like it would a Coca-Cola than it does a fruit. And so that's one thing I think about when juicing. If you're going to juice the whole fruit product and eat it, you know, that's better than separating the juice from the fruit.
One thing I did, and this is just my personal experience, is that I needed protein. And so I've started doing, it's not really juicing, I'm making myself more a protein smoothie in the mornings. And I put a cup to a cup and a half of kale or some, lettuce. And then I will put the protein powder in it, and then I'll put a small amount of the berries, but I put the berries in there and mix that all up in a juicer and take that in. But Catherine's point's well taken, that what you want to do is get the whole everything with it, the pulp, the fiber, everything.
That's great. Thank you so much for your answer. We have 5 minutes to answer more questions. And let's see the other one. It says, how about drinking kombucha and coconut juice?
So, coconut water is healthy for you. It does have a lot of potassium in it. It has some good nutrients in it. They sometimes add vitamin C to it. So I certainly think you can drink coconut water to help hydrate. You don't want to drink it exclusively. But we recommend that for patients who are low in potassium levels for a variety of reasons. When I make my morning smoothie, I make it with coconut water. I don't like the taste of coconut water, so I hide the taste with the other things I'm putting in my smoothie. But yeah, I think it's healthy for you in moderation. I don't know about kombucha, something I don't know a lot about. Dr. Fain, do you have thoughts on kombucha?
It's a sweetened black or green tea. It's interesting. So kombucha is fine I'm not sure what they use as a sweetener with it, but green tea is good. You have to be careful not to have it in huge quantities because it is a toxin to the liver. I had a patient who had an unusual reaction to an antibiotic, and I had to send her to a specialist up in Dallas, a liver specialist. And much to my surprise, she drank a lot of green tea, and he cautioned me about that. But in normal quantities, if you're not having it all the time, it should be fine.
Perfect, great. Brandy asks, I had triple negative stage 1 cut early, full response to treatment. Is there anything different for this non-hormone caused type?
Is there anything different about, you mean as far as the type of foods that you eat, or if you have an early stage triple negative breast cancer, the stage is the most important determinant in risk of recurrence and potential for progression. And interesting, with triple negative breast cancer, if you do not have a recurrence in the first 2 years, you're much less likely to have a recurrence as compared to somebody with estrogen receptor positive disease, where we want to monitor and continue to follow that because there's risk of recurrence out 5, 10, 15, 20 years in some patients. So it's a very different subset. Being stage 1 is fantastic. Studies are looking at the early stage 1 cancers now because so many more patients are presenting with early stage, and it's clearly a much better prognosis. So if you were treated appropriately for triple negative breast cancer, you maintain an active, healthy lifestyle, your chances of cure are very high. It's with any cancer, I tell patients it's never 100%. We always want to watch you. Just because we think risk of recurrence is not very high after 2 years, do we continue to follow you? You bet. I hope that answers that.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Fain and Katharine Lord, for answering these questions. Let's just finish with one more. It says, any recommendation for a good protein powder for a smoothie? I think we all want to know that.
So we recommend a plant-based protein powder, a pea powder, a hemp powder, or a brown rice powder. I recommend going to a place like Whole Foods where you can talk to the people that work there. They know the products really well, so that they can tell you about the particulars of the individual products. But we recommend avoiding a whey protein.
Another thing I found is you have to look at the labels on those because interestingly, when they want to make it palatable, they will put in either carbohydrates or they will put in salt. And so it's a real challenge because me being a heart patient, I have to limit sodium. And so I found that really hard to do. And there's certain ones that I would buy, and eventually they go out from Whole Foods, and you end up, thank goodness for Amazon. You find them on Amazon and you can look at them, but you find one that you like, and that's palatable. It's hard with protein powders because some taste good, some dissolve completely, some don't, some are lumpy and not very tasteful. But
thank you. One last one. With the pandemic, people are choosing to use food delivery services, Blue Apron, HelloFresh, Home Fresh, that have vegetarian recipes. Are there any ones that are better than others, or has there been any much research on these types of vegetarian meals?
that's a good question.
It's a good question. I don't know that I really have an answer, but when you're looking at those meal services, certainly choosing vegetarian and vegan options is better than meat-based meals. It's a good question. You could post on social media who's used some of these services. Do you like them? Why not? I don't use them myself, so I haven't had experience with that. But certainly, always picking a meal service that's going to offer vegetarian options or vegan options is going to be preferred.
That's right. I completely agree. So we want to thank Dr. Fain and Katharine Lord for sharing their time and expertise with us today. They've shared invaluable information that empowers all of us to take action today. In addition, we want to thank all of you who joined us today. We will follow up with you with links to the resources mentioned there in their presentation and common resources to support you. We hope to see you in the future events. Have a great day, everyone, and be well. Happy Wednesday.